You're listening to UnitedWeStrike.com radio. Don't buy, don't comply. Ask why. UnitedWeStrike.com radio.
And welcome back. We have just got back to the English-speaking section of United We Strike. You're joined by myself, Margetts. I'm joined with Jane. This is a monumental experience for us both because Jane has actually come up to Bristol to our offices to sit beside me and join in on the experience. We've also got online Judith from the When You Need Messenger. You can reach her site on www.voteforit.org. There's a section on the left-hand side which is the When You Need Messenger, and that is that's Judith's site. Judith's going to do a short piece on the NHS for us. Judith, do you want to take it away?
Yes, I'm very grateful to a friend of mine who doesn't want to be named and sent me this article from the Telegraph. Luckily, we were able to find it on the internet because what you don't get today in the newspapers are the blogs. And the reason I'm bringing up this article is because I've never, ever previously found such a disparity between the information in the article and people who wrote in saying, actually, you haven't got this right. Now, that always happens, but not to the extent that it happens here. And what made it particularly frightening is that I've belonged to something called No to ID for years. We get a fortnightly newsletter come out, and the question of sus has never, ever come up. And that is despite the fact they've told everybody about the NHS spine. So what is going on here? Let's take a look at the article. Now, the article is titled, NHS Misleads Patients Over Sharing Medical Records with Drug Firms. And I'll read this, then we'll go through the blogs because it's raising really, really important questions. A new NHS computer system that will share the medical history of millions of patients with drug companies without proper consent is under attack from privacy experts who say it is misleading, risky and potentially illegal. Now, this is by Christopher Williams, and it came out on the 4th of February this year. The system, the Secondary Uses Service, SUS, this is where you get sus from, is part of the NHS's Troubled National Programme for IT and massively expands the amounts of medical data that commercial and academic researchers can access. In many cases, patients will not be asked for consent for their data to be shared because it will be anonymised. Now, don't forget that. That's a really important point here. A process which deletes certain information with the aim of making individuals unidentifiable. However, in a letter to the British Medical Journal, Dr. Ian Brown of the Oxford Internet Institute said that the NHS rules mean such unwitting participants in research can be trivially re-identified. They are also not to be told or given a choice about how their medical records will be used, he said, and misled about the risk to their privacy. This is something that is just getting going, Dr. Brown told the Telegraph. The SUS replaces previous record-sharing arrangements that were typically on much smaller scale and involved patient consent. It will supply data where patients' names and addresses have been replaced by their date of birth and postcode. As a postcode typically contains about 20 houses, almost all patients are easily identifiable by reference to these facts, Dr. Brown said in the letter, which is co-signed by Lindsay Brown, a researcher in public health ethics at Bristol University, and Professor Dale Koff, a data protection law specialist at London Metropolitan University. Some of the anonymised data also includes the unique NHS number for each patient, making them even more identifiable. According to Dr. Brown and his colleagues, such weak privacy policies could be illegal under European data protection law. Patients are not currently being adequately informed about possible secondary uses of their medical data for medical research, said Dr. Brown and his colleagues. Patients are not asked to give clear, specific, free and informed consent, are not offered unambiguous and effective opt-outs, and are misled about the level of anonymisation of their data and the likelihood of re-identification, they added. The letter is a response to suggestions by scientists that rules on accessing patient data should be further relaxed. They have welcomed SUS and argued that easier access to sensitive data records will spur medical advances. It is irresponsible to insist that no regulation and government should interfere with researchers' access to health records or record linkage capabilities, said Dr. Brown and his colleagues. A Department of Health spokesman said, "We respect the need to ensure that the privacy and confidentiality of patients is protected. Subject to that, we know the value of harnessing information for public health and medical research. We have robust safeguards for data so that interests of patients are protected. Responses to the Information Revolution consultation have highlighted the need to clarify these for the new system, and we will be addressing this." The National Programme for IT was conceived under the Labour government at a cost of around $12.7 billion, making it the most expensive public technology programme in the world. Since coming to power, the coalition has announced it will abandon the name and shave an $17 million from the price tag, in addition to the $600 million cut made by Alistair Darling in 2009. Several suppliers have dropped out and doctors' groups have questioned the clinical value of the scheme, which will digitise patient records and make them available throughout the NHS. Now, I think that in itself, I don't know what everyone else here thinks, but I think that article really should get people quaking in their shoes, and I'll tell you why. We know for a fact that conscripts to the Russian army have died mysterious deaths and their organs have gone missing. That will happen if you have a rare condition, a rare blood group, something like that. We also know it happened in Kosovo. We know too that it happens in places like India. People just disappear. And it certainly happens in countries where nobody cares if people disappear off the streets. South America, a prime example. Now, we've got a lot of comments here, but the first one really does tell you that people have a problem. And this is written as follows. This story is factually flawed in a number of respects, and this misinformation is clearly causing considerable upset. I am not suggesting you shouldn't be concerned about the use of your personal information. You should. But this story mixes fact and fiction in an alarmist way and misleads. Firstly, it is against the law to use health information that can identify you as an individual for any purpose other than your individual healthcare without your consent. The National Information Governance Board publishes the Care Record Guarantee, and this is commitment 4. All NHS bodies must deliver on this guarantee. One might ask, and how would the public know if they didn't? If one of these NHS bodies discovered somebody was selling data or hacking, are they going to phone up the Telegraph and give them the good news? Secondly, the Secondary Uses Services is run by the Information Centre for Health and Social Care, not NHS Connecting for Health, which was the arm's-length body responsible for the National Programme for IT. Okay. Thirdly, anonymised data is fluid. Well, we're all going to be pleased to hear this, aren't we? Anonymity is related to the amount of information in the public domain and the amount of effort required to re-identify. In the NHS, the correct term is, all ready for this? Effectively anonymised, and some data is, don't miss this one, pseudo-anonymised. Oh dear, I don't like the word pseudo. Effectively anonymised data is not covered by the Data Protection Act, as without an unreasonable amount of effort, the individual cannot be re-identified. So we're well protected there then, aren't we? Again. Pseudo-anonymised data includes a key that can enable the re-identification of the individual with appropriate permissions, i.e., for the purposes of treating that individual because it has been identified they may be at risk. For example, through mass analysis of breast cancer screening results. Pseudo-anonymised data does not come within the Data Protection Act. Now, I think most people would find that hard to understand. I would call that criminally negligent. We should be given maximum protection. Other errors include sus data can be used for research. It cannot, as sus requires special permission to exist at all, and this would be a breach of its permission. Look at the country we live in today. Do we not see these lapses of integrity almost every single day of the week? When you have the police forces giving their undercover officers, who are daily recording the activities of people who are committing no crime, permission to sleep around, what does the word integrity mean to the people who control various aspects of our lives? It doesn't appear to be very much. Now, it goes on. Full postcodes are used. They are not, for exactly the reason highlighted. Only the first portion of the postcode is used. Right, well, that's really difficult, isn't it? They've got the first part of the postcode, so what have they got? 100 people. So then they've worked out, according to your disease, whether you're likely to be male or female. They'll probably know how old you are. Getting easier, isn't it? And if you've got things that are recognisable to certain groups, for example, I know with Cypriots, they've got certain blood troubles, which the rest of the world doesn't suffer from. It's going to get easier and easier to work out who they are. Now, let's look. Anonymised data includes the NHS number. It does not, as this is considered an identifier. Patients are not asked to give consent. They should be. Oh, really? I mean, I'm sure everyone knows the story about a family who discovered growths had been made from their mother's cancer and sent all over the world. It's ridiculous. In the NHS, consent comes in 3 forms: implicit, informed, and explicit. To share patient information other than for healthcare purposes, informed or explicit is required. Sorry, I'm not convinced. Where patients do need to be cautious is in the full draft health bill, which gives the Information Centre sweeping new powers to collect patient information, and where they live in trust areas whose information governance toolkit compliance falls below the prescribed level, especially in requirement 8/324. Now, I wonder what that means in real terms, and I wonder if they're ever going to tell us. Will, for example, when the NHS Trust gives its report, will that information, because they have to produce reports every year, will that information be included in the report? Sorry, I interrupted somebody there.
So, where would you think this information is going? Because they already control an awful lot of information. I know the banks, if you're going to get a mortgage, they ask just about every single medical question about you. So do they not have this information anyway? Do you think this is targeted at anybody in particular?
Ever since this business came out years ago, I was always worried. I think the main target will be people who've got rare things, rare blood, rare conditions, or people who've got the same as the rest of us, nothing particularly important, until they overcome a disease that kills everyone else. The fact is, organs are being sold illegally now. It is a fact. And people are going to become targets. It's wrong. From what I can see, we are not given access to our real medical information because, you know, the doctors treat us like cretins. Oh, we're big enough, old enough and clever enough to pay taxes that pay their wages, but we're not really able to understand our medical condition. We can't look after our own medical records. They can't trust us to do anything. But they will trust people with big wallets to use the information with integrity. Well, as far as I'm concerned, they can treat their own medical records that way, but they're not treating mine that way, and that's why I'm not registered with a doctor. The way things are going, I don't think the medical profession has made nearly enough fuss about this, and I'm surprised that they're not worried about their own medical records being treated in this way. We have a right to determine what happens in our lives, and every day of the week something like this pops up under your nose, and the public are just being absolutely mesmerised, bulldozed, and they flake back in their chair and say, what can we do? We can't do anything. This is the sort of thing we've got to stop happening, but we won't stop it happening until people know what is happening. I'll go on. Finally, it is ridiculous to suggest that no regulation exists on the secondary use of patient information for research purposes. This is heavily regulated part of the NHS compliance, with many hundreds of people employed to manage it. What Dr. Brown could have usefully highlighted is that these people are often sidelined by management and are one of the areas where management cuts have been deepest. Now, that paragraph has me spread-eagled on the ceiling. This is a heavily regulated part of the NHS compliance. For God's sake, exactly what does that mean? The NHS hasn't got any bloody money. They then go on to say, many hundreds of people employed to manage it. I don't see that as many hundreds of opportunities to keep it quiet and make sure the information only goes to the right people. And even if they could make sure it only went to the right people for the right reasons, once that information has gone to the companies, there's no control over it. I mean, to even suggest that that is even a part-way safeguard is so ridiculous, it isn't true. I really wonder what people are doing for brains these days, and I would think that was written by a professional person. I would think this is either a doctor or it's a professional hospital manager. They seem to know the ropes. They're using all the right phrases, and yet they still believe the nonsense. We are protected. We are not protected. The next quote, sorry, I'm interrupting.
There was, wasn't there, didn't the EU, didn't you say earlier something about the EU demanded to know how this could be done? Wasn't there some sort of EU protection under the EU law?
Yeah, but we all know about the EU, don't we?
We do, but it keeps coming up every now and then. We seem to get something, one good thing for 50,000 bad things out of the EU.
The problem is, you see, they don't actually say to you what the EU's wanted, and again, they've not quoted what their source is. This is why I keep on at people when they send me emails. What do you expect me to do with this? You could be right, you could be wrong, it could be a complete fairy tale. Where did it come from? Now, sometimes I get a response where I can actually track it, but when you look at where it came from, they're getting facts without their sources. Well, that's no good. The EU may have said it. I didn't pick it up in the papers. But then you know perfectly well, only the really bad things that people know about get reported in our press.
So it could be a smoke and mirrors thing.
I'm afraid so, yeah. All right, I'll take the next one. This is a total disgrace. Well, I completely agree with that. This allows Big Pharma to access personal records and select the few that will support the current medical marketing scam. Those records that do not support it will be ignored. Now, before anybody says, oh, they're just saying that, no, they're not. There is good evidence here. If you go to a website called HSI, you will see there put in things like Big Pharma, the agency, there's some sort of drug agency that has to check all that they do. Do you know in America they regularly let American companies off producing test results on the understanding the drug can be sold, but that the research has to continue? Then when people start dying in their thousands, they discover, oh, fancy that, Big Pharma didn't continue researching. There is no guarantee here. This person is quite right. And please do not suggest that Big Pharma will not do this. Dr. Marcia Angel, an ex-editor-in-chief of the NEJM, was written widely on this marketing-type research. Also, a recent paper by Michael D. Logiel and Patricia Salen, recent cholesterol-lowering drug trials, new data, new questions, blah, 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 blah. Next comment. The letter is a response to suggestions by scientists that the rules on accessing to patient data should be further relaxed. They have welcomed SAS and argued that easier access to sensitive data will spur medical advances. Stopcom is spot on with his conclusion. There is no doubt the whole system falls under total information system, where the scientific priesthood want all our information to do with, just a moment, fingers getting old, won't work on requests, what can you do? With what it wants. And then they make this marvellous quote, which I've never heard before. The more we do to you, the less you seem to believe we are doing it. Now, guess who said that? Joseph Mengele. Well, well, who would have guessed?
So what can we do about this then? As
we go through these quotes, you will see that people have made suggestions, but I'm not sure all of these suggestions hold water, because I've actually looked into some of them. Now, they're saying here, for example, this means that people will become human guinea pigs without their knowledge. Outrageous. I'm afraid that's true. Then the next one says your details will appear if you did not opt out by ticking the box on your electoral roll form. Now, here we have a big problem, because that box on the electoral roll form appeared relatively recently. And I sat here reading this and thought, I'm safe, I ticked the box. What I didn't know was that later on you'll see they've come up with a website called 192.com. Now, what these people are doing, they are now selling old databases compiled before that box appeared on the electoral registration form. And they are including things